In this video help tutorial, let's go back to the app menu because we're going to be doing the subscreens for the support inventory, inventory listing. Those two screens are one of the most important. I'm going to point out something. When you create this database and add your own information to it as far as creating it, what you want to do is add your customer data records first, add your inventory second, do any of the purchase orders and what we usually call a default listing where you would take in all the data that you currently have for both inventory and purchase records and add those in. And this would be a historical as far as how far you want to go back. I would say 6 months to a year. If you want to do everything, it's going to take you some time, but you can import records only on the desktop, Windows, Mac, and the cloud. You cannot import records on the iPad or iPhone, but you can export them. So if you needed something imported into the application, you could send me back information or the records, and I could put those in for the cloud, Windows, and Mac if that's your intention. On the iPhone, iPad, Apple did not design the applications that are being put in there or the hardware for iPhone and iPad to accept records by importing them. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to cover the support inventory and the inventory list. Then we're going to go to purchasing and then on from there. One of the other ways you can open up the records, you can go in to the list view for inventory and see all the items that are in the list view. And we'll come back to that as far as all the items that are currently in the listing for all the inventory items. But I wanted to point out again, if you're looking over here at the support inventory popover, when you go into the popover and you create a new part, you put in the image, you put in the basic information in the vendor, the primary vendor that's going to be your vendor. You can also leave that up to later when you are going to work in the actual database and then put in that information. The parts notes, these are basically about vendors and pricing, or in this case it's cost that you're paying for items because you're buying wholesale, I hope you are at least, that you would want to have the record data in there. Now we'll pop over to the portal itself, which is the actual record for the item you're looking at. So you go over to the portal and click in. Now you've already created the record in the technical data screen. So what it's going to do, it's going to supply most of the data that you're going to be putting in here, but there's additional information that has to be added. You already should have added your image in the other screen, in the data screen. You should have already had your notes. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put in the standard price and the standard cost. Now what the standard price and cost do, this is what you're going to use for standard cost, is what you buy the item in, or the average, basically the average price you're going to be buying it at. What you do is you would strike an average cost and then put that in here, and then you'll know what your vendor should be basically at as far as what the cost should be for that item when you're buying it. In the case of a labor item, standard cost is the standard cost. In other words, this is what your unloaded thing is for the person that is actually doing the labor. So if it's $76 an hour that he's charging his labor to, the actual price that you're charging the client would be the standard price. So at this case, it's $99 an hour. Now this could obviously be quite a swing. There's a lot of positions that people have that are well over $100 or more per hour. So, but this is just the standards that you're looking at, so you know basically what you're looking at. The next thing you have over here is a vendor add-on, and what this is you can put the vendors that you, if you have a product in here instead of a labor kind of thing, you would select a vendor. You could pop up and look through the different vendors that are available by scrolling through the different vendors, and when you find the one you want, you can copy and paste that vendor into the vendor listing. And then there may be a note or two that you may want to have in there about that, like his standard cost for this item is between, say it's a part, and say it's $50, and then you charge it, or you are actually buying it over time. It may vary, and you can look at the different vendors if you put their names in here and what their standard cost is here. That way you can average it if you have to. The next thing is the product status. This is a drop-down list where it says out of stock, in order, and so forth. Now what you can do is you can click the edit, bring it up, reorder them any way you want to, and add or delete these items when you're setting up the database, when you're doing it yourself. So that's what you should do, is go ahead and go in there and add that information as far as what you want in place in this particular screen. Now, what I'm going to be doing, just so I'm going to warn you, I'm going to be taking out a lot of the information that is used as examples that you see in here, both in the data screen and in the other screens that we're working with. I will take out the vendors and all that, and so you can put in your own without having to create or go around those records that are added in there. Now, what I do in a lot of databases, I will leave those in there and allow you to edit them and overwrite the data. But I think you want to do everything when you're doing something like this that has a closed loop inventory system to go back to scratch one and start all over again and add your current stuff that you have in inventory, and also your data records and your purchase records and those kinds of things that you're going to be using yourself. In this particular record, we do see when there's a labor item, there's not going to be anything you're going to order. You're not ordering labor. And I want to point out that in this case, the quantity received and ordered will not be in there, and you'll always have a minus in here. So I wouldn't worry too much if you see a minus in there for quantity on hand for labor. It's not something that is actually used that way. And in this particular case, if you are doing a work order and the work order used one, it'll show you like a quantity of one is used. And you'll see it down here. It says sum of work order items. Well, this particular screen in here is not something you edit. This is generated by the work order as you put things in work orders that are related to the actual part number or part name up here at the top. It's going to use that information and find that particular record that is that one, that is the part number, and then it's going to go ahead and create a work order information thing. These are not edited. You can see, you can click on them, and you don't change anything here. You don't edit them from here. If you want to see the work order, what you can do is you can go to the work order portal, or you can go to the work order invoice. The portal is the sub-record that shows the record here. The work order invoice is the whole invoice with all the data that is related to this particular record, and that's the one you would go look at. Okay, it does not show the individual work order PO number or work order number, but when you go there and you click on it, it's going to show that work order number. We'll be covering that separately later on, so you'll be able to see that. And in this particular case, it'll always fill the top two fields. When you create a record here on another screen, in this particular case where you're doing the work order, you would create it in the data screen, the first one we looked at. And what it'll do is it'll create a new record below it where it'll automatically add the appropriate fields here for the next time that one of these is used in a work order. Okay? So if you create a next work order and you use it again, it's going to take the summary data from that work order, and that's what's going to go in here. And like all this status stuff here is for review. And at the bottom, when you're looking at the item itself, it's important to understand that you can do trend analysis. If this was a product, and every time you bought a product, that would be something that you want to see. How many you bought, what did you people pay for them, and this would summarize for all the records in selection here in the portal. It'll count how many times it's been used. It'll show the sum of the price, and then you can divide that by the number of actual orders. In this case, the quantity here would be 1 at 99, and that would be the total. And when you come down here, the summary would be take this and divide it into this, and that'll tell you what the average price was that was paid for them. Okay, and like I said, we'll cover these later, but basically they go to the work order invoice and the work order portal for the record. You do not create vendors in this screen. You create the vendors in the data screen like all the other records that we're creating. And you can always look up here and you can see who was the initial record of order that created this part. So if you're going through here, the item ID for the record that was created in is where that started as far as a product that was added to the database from the data screen. One of the things that you recall that when I was showing you the inventory screen, that you cannot create a record that has already been created in another record. So when it went into ID1 and you try to put in this information to add another thing that is like labor, what it'll do is it'll bump you in the data record and say you cannot create another record that's exactly the same as this part number. So that saves you having errors in the inventory where you have multiple records for the same part number. So you got to be very careful not to recreate records in this screen. For example, do not edit this field up here. The only reason we leave it as you can edit it up here is there may be some error that you might have to correct for some reason, and you can take care of it. This, you can go in here if you wanted to change the picture or add it, you could do that. You can see that you can insert a picture, an audio or video, a PDF, or insert a file in this image. But in this particular case, it should be an insert picture from the photo library. You could put an image in there as far as a video with audio, or just audio if you want to. But let me explain something. Every time you add a video, you're piling up a lot of memory into this record here. And what that would do is it expands your database too rapidly. What you can do is you can take the URL of the screen page where this audio or video is at. Maybe it comes either from your own website or it comes from, say, YouTube, where you have a YouTube video. Just put the URL and put it over here under Part Notes. And that would be where you want to have the notes that says that this is the video or something that you're using audio that is related to that particular part. Okay, so that pretty well covers this screen. Let's go back in and go down here. We did support inventory. Now we're going to go to the list view. Now, one of the things I want to point out before we leave here is that if you did have a purchase order cut, and I'm going to repeat this because we've done this before, but I want you to see it in this screen. If you ordered something, it would put the order quantity in here from the purchase order. If you receive the items, the received amount will go in here. It'll automatically calculate down here the quantity used from invoices where it's used down here in the work order. And it'll also reduce the quantity of on hand by how many you used over here. That's why we have a -1 right now, because we never received any, but we used one supposedly, and that in this case is labor. But you have to have, if you're buying a product, you have to have the product in the inventory screen before you can go ahead and start using it on a work order. So if you're going to add a new part or part item, you would go to the data screen, go to the popover for the inventory, and add it in that screen. Don't enter them here. That's a mistake. You do not create the records in here because it will not relate it to the inventory ID and who actually created it in what screen. That has to come from the inventory popover in the data screen. As shown here, when you create the inventory item here, when you create the records in this portal, which is a sliding portal, it'll go up and down. And let's go ahead and drag it down. You can see that there's a blank for a new record. And of course, if it's in the inventory, like we showed before, when you add it, you'll be picking it from the list if it's already been in there. But you do not repeat that. Basically, what this is doing is checking for the part number to see that it's in there in the database. What you would do if it's not in there, you would create it in this screen right here in the part number, and that would create it. You would add the image and the rest of the data in here. You would not be adding this because that's coming from calculated things between the work order invoice and the purchase order. Okay, so if that created any questions, you have any doubts about what you're doing, make sure that you contact us and we'll go ahead and take care of correcting any doubts that you have about how that works. So let's pop out of here again, and we're going to go back to the inventory list view. Now, what's happening in this screen, you can see that we have -1, 2, and so forth. What this is telling you is that, in this case, if it's labor screens, that this is how many times that the labor has been used, but it'll always be a negative number. If it's a thing like an outside service, that is another one that would do that. But here's a part. Let's go ahead and look at that. Go into the screen. What has happened here is we supposedly ordered 3 quantity of, received 3 quantity, used 2, 1 is left over. So that you can see how this works. Go down here. This is the total of actual items, and this is the summary of all the items costs. That's different than if you did a $35.90 one. You're actually looking at the summary of all the numbers here for the actual line order summary in the work order portal. So this is where you're getting the information. And like I said, you can always take this number, divide it into this, and you get the quantity average price, or average cost, pardon me. Okay, let's go back now. We did go to the inventory list view. We also reviewed the inventory support. We've also looked at a pop-up for the vendor. So we've covered pretty much all the things. These screens, these three that we're looking at here, are basically how the inventory works. And that's the information you're going to be using. Okay, in the next video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to go down to the purchase order, the purchase portal, the list view, and we'll cover the the vendor and the vendor list view. So we're going to combine all these purchase informations here, and then we're going to go on to the last records in the last video. And then we'll have another video using the iPad where we're going to see how to use the iPad interface with this application. Thank you.